Welcome to ESG Decoded, where we unravel the business complexities at the intersection of environmental, social, and governance issues.
I'm Erika Schiller, and I'm joined by my ClimeCo colleagues, Emma Cox and Anna Stablum.
Get ready to explore the intersection of sustainability, innovation, and ethical leadership, the dynamic forces shaping our global economy.
From climate action to social responsibility, we're here to decode the ESG landscape by interviewing interesting leading figures across the globe that will empower you with actionable insights.
Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or just embarking on your sustainability journey, this podcast is your compass for navigating the future of responsible business practices.
Let's decode ESG together.
At Amazon, scale means operating thousands of buildings, from the data centers that power streaming, shopping, and AI services we rely on daily, to the fulfillment centers that process your orders. And with scale comes responsibility. That's why Amazon is more than halfway to their goal to be water positive in their data center operations by 2030. They're innovating to reduce water use and partnering with utilities to upgrade infrastructure so that they can use reclaimed wastewater in data centers. Also, the water use in their data centers is already 5 times better than the industry average. Learn more at amazon.com/sustainability. Sustainability is no longer a side initiative. It's becoming central to how companies grow and compete. In this episode of ESG Decoded, I'm joined by Mary de Wysocki, Cisco's Chief Sustainability Officer, to discuss what it looks like to embed sustainability across a global tech business. We'll discuss circular design, aligning innovation with impact, and how AI is reshaping energy demand. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer view of how sustainability can move from ambition to execution at scale. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Well, before we dive in, Mary, I wanted to start by kicking off with one sort of starter question, which is, what is one sustainability belief you hold today that you didn't hold 10 years ago?
I'd probably say that sustainability now is really integrated into not only the infrastructure, but how you run your business or your strategy. Where if I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was almost alongside. So now, to me, it's that embedded, the integration, looking for the win-win for both business, perhaps growth. Maybe it's trust and customer relevancy and intimacy, as well as sustainability.
I love that, because I can remember when sustainability really was sort of a nice to have and a separate, but it's great to hear that we're sort of starting to think about how we embed it in the entire business. So we'll get into that, I'm sure, a little bit more later. But Mary, I want to start our conversation, as I do in many of my episodes, by really focusing on you and the human behind the work. So I'd love to sort of get into your story a little bit more. So tell me, Mary, sort of what originally pulled you to this work? What sort of, was there a moment or experience where sort of the why behind the work became personal to you?
I'd probably say sustainability, like all parts of my career, just been very organic. So I've been with Cisco for over 25 years, and I started in a really interesting group that was a pro bono consulting group. We were working with Fortune 50 companies, thinking how technology, digitization would change their business. And that just led me to think about, as a tech optimist, imagine what technology could do for the world, to the communities we live, work, and create in. So I had the huge opportunity to spend a couple of years down in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, where Cisco showed up in a way we really wanted to help bring the community back. And so what we ended up doing is bringing our technology. We thought the way you would bring the community back is through education. So bringing technology. Imagine a data center, teacher laptops, interactive whiteboard, really connecting these young students to the world. And so that, to me, started my journey in corporate social responsibility. And that kind of morphed into how do I influence our overarching strategy, ESG, CSR, corporate affairs, purpose. And as I was doing that and thinking about long-range planning, when you start thinking a little bit past 1-2 years, sustainability really becomes a critical enabler as well as potentially a risk. And so that then led me to take on sustainability as part of how I incubated the strategy. I think it also kind of harkened back to when I spent time in New Orleans of seeing how the power, right, of Mother Earth and are we building the resiliency into the community? Are we thinking about how to adapt for the new reality?
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. And I know also that you are Cisco's first ever Chief Sustainability Officer. So take us a little bit into how that came to be. Were you sort of the person there waving your hand and saying, I'd love this role? How did it happen? Tell us.
This is one of the reasons why I love working at Cisco is because we've been investing in the space since the early 2000s. And the way we did it was always very collaborative. We had experts in supply chain, in our workplace resources, in our ESG reporting, in our engineering team. And we just always worked very collaborative. We thought through, well, what would our net zero strategy, our ambition be, for example? But as you might recall, we've been living in a pretty dynamic regulatory space over the last 10 years or so. And there came a time where the company really wanted to identify one person who would be completely accountable for not only our ambition, but making progress toward it. And that what we said reinforced the trust that we had when we talked to our customers about our products, our solutions, how we show up. So it was one of those, in some ways, Emma, I was in the right place at the right time, kind of going back to organic. And I think it was one of those areas where you just took a moment and thought about how privileged it was to be where you were, that all of your experiences kind of led you to a place where I think, imagine what kind of impact you could have on the world.
That's a wonderful story. And in some of our earlier conversations, Mary, leading up to this episode, you shared with me a really interesting part of your background, which is that you sort of have a background in theater. So tell me a little bit about maybe how has that background sort of helped you maybe in your current role today? We'd love to hear.
I feel like I think everyone should be a theater kid. But I came from a large family. Like, I'm one of 7 kids. So we were just a ready-made, not only team, but show all the time. And I think having theater allows you to really build out your communication skills. I think it makes you understand. Sometimes when you have a character, really also helps you try to imagine what it's like to live another person's life. I think that's critical when you really think about how the future, whether it's AI and how it's going to change the job or the environment, how we need to adapt communities. But I don't know if I also told you that I went to law school. On top of that, I think what's been fascinating of having a liberal arts background where you're taught how to learn across multiple disciplines. I think when you think about purpose, it's very interdisciplinary when you think across different areas. I think theater allowed me to think through the communication of the presence, where what law school allowed me to do is how do I build my case? How do I influence whoever, whether it was a jury or a senior executive or the board, into understanding both the opportunity and where and why, if we invest in whether it's our net zero ambition or circularity, how we can do something that's great for the business. Our customers want it, and quite frankly, it also helps the communities.
Oh, that's great, Mary. You just touched on 2 really important skills, I think, that this industry and the professionals that work in it need and need to build more of, that sort of empathy, right? Sort of understanding who you're talking to, really getting in their head and listening, right? And then the other skill is really this sort of sort of negotiation skill, right? Like, how do you negotiate and convince someone to sort of buy into your vision of the future? So I think, wow, amazing how you sort of linked that so perfectly. But it sounds like you have some really important skills to succeed in this role. So thank you for sharing a little bit about your story. So quickly, before we sort of move on from Mary's story, I do want to hear a little bit about, so you've been in this role for a while, and how have you seen it sort of evolve from the first chief sustainability officer taking on as a single one-person team to today? How has it evolved?
Yeah. I think one of the things that is a little bit different is probably the advent of AI has been an interesting addition to not only our technology and how we build the network and the infrastructure, right, to securely connect everything, kind of to make anything happen. But I also think that we live in a very interesting time. I mentioned a little bit about the regulatory space where it's shifting and changing. I think one of the first things as we built the Chief Sustainability Office was what model makes the most sense for Cisco. And we really chose a model that was more of an orchestration center, a center of excellence, a group that would ensure that we're connecting every part of the business together, whether it's engineering, supply chain, legal, finance, sales, services, procurement, workplace resources. I wanted everyone to continue having a seat at the table. And I think that we co-created our strategy, the plan for possible. But I think one of the things that I've seen over the last couple of years is kind of as a community move from having an ambition to actually now identifying the actions that we are taking and what results are we seeing. How can we really identify where we have invested, whether a power purchase agreement, and what that ROI looked like? Or how are we designing our products in a way that is providing the AI capability or the bandwidth that is needed, the security that's needed, but also ensuring that we're doing it in an energy efficient way. So I think what I see is that movement from theory to reality to implementation to ensuring transparency to measurement.
Wow. Yeah, you just packaged that up so nicely. And how powerful to be in the same role for so long, to see sort of moving from that ambition to actual progress that you can point to. And then the other theme that you mentioned was really embedding it in the sort of business and seeing that sort of further embedding over the years. So that is a very cool story.
And it's one of the things that I often think about of what does success ultimately look like? And to me, it's when it is so embedded into the decisions everyone's making that it is part of your near-term and your long-term strategy, that you really see it as a way that you can show how our investments are, yes, decarbonizing our business, driving, right, more circular models into your business, supporting the customer. But I also think it's future-proofing. And by embedding it into every function, every part of the organization has to take some action along the way to truly think through decarbonizing and, I think, envisioning what technologies are going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years. Because when you're in this space, we have to imagine what the future is going to be and make sure that you're designing your strategy, sometimes to signal a demand, sometimes to invest in that new capability, but to really almost sometimes live in the current reality and then think through what could you do to accelerate or really bring to life what you believe the future will hold.
Oh, I love that. Sort of enabling what you want to see happen in the future. That's great. Well, let's transition a little bit. We've already started to talk a little bit about Cisco's great sustainability work, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper and give you the opportunity to really share how such a large tech company with so much influence in business can do to influence sustainability, not just within your own operations, but in your supply chains with your clients, right? So Tell me, Mary, just sort of when someone asks, what does Cisco stand for in sustainability? How do you answer that question?
I always probably highlight three parts of our plan for possible. It's all about how we're accelerating the transition to cleaner energy. Second, embedding circularity. And third, it's really about enabling resiliency in the communities we live, work in, and play or create in. So when I think about energy, especially now as we know that AI, the opportunity to really harness the power of AI is going to need energy. This is where I do know our products and services can really help our customers, whether it is to power up a secure data center or leveraging the network as we all are living in this kind of hybrid workforce environment, whether it's thinking through the grid, making sure that we've got the ability to send the energy where we need it. On the circular side, this is really shifting from what was how I grew up with a linear business model where you'd make something, you'd use it and throw it out, into a way that you're thinking first and foremost, reducing waste, multiple life cycles, thinking through how you make things more modular, energy efficiency that I mentioned before. I do see this as another area where when you understand the scarcity of resources, this can be a really interesting model to develop your products, your packaging, your partnership with your customers and your partners. And then this resiliency is really around this concept of resilient ecosystems. I do know that technology, imagine technology at the edge, whether it's a IoT or internet thing device, a sensor out there that could anticipate the need for land management as we're anticipating, let's say, a wildfire, or the ability to understand the acidity of soil, or a monitor for advancing floodwaters. The ability now to have intelligence out there in your community, I think that allows us as citizens, as community partners, to think through what we can do to really create that adaptive, the resilient, the regenerative communities.
Oh, I love that. You just teed up my next question perfectly, which is around circularity, which I know is something that is a really key part of Cisco's sustainability strategy. So I do want to have you tell us a little bit more about sort of, you talk a lot about this circular transformation. So what does that actually mean in practice, right? Especially when you think about a tech company, which, you have a number of different pieces of hardware or software, or what does that mean for your company?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with when you say circular, it is this model, right, where you anticipate that a product could have multiple uses, maybe customer one, customer two. You think about how it gets responsibly end of life, maybe recycled, for example. But where we started was first figure out, what do we mean by circular design? Defining those circular design principles. What do they look like? For example, being more modular. When you think about modular, in the old days, I don't know, is 10, 15, 20 years now old? But like in the old days, you would bring forward a switch or router. And when the new version came out, you would have to replace that whole thing. Where modular, you can now take a particular focus on just maybe a component that you might upgrade. So it's much more easily assembled, disassembled. You may just upgrade software. So one principle is all around this modularity, right? Another is, and I mentioned energy efficiency. How are you thinking through the next generation of being more powerful? Maybe it's, again, more bandwidth or more compute capability or more security or more ability to collaborate. But you're also looking for ways to increase the energy efficiency version over version. I do think we really focus in on that end of life aspect, right? Can we design our products with more recycled material, for example? When you think through the materials, can you choose one that are more easily either abstracted or recycled? So you first design all of those different principles and then think through, well, would you know if it's designed into a product or into, for example, your packaging? An example in the packaging might be, again, what percentage, how do we want to think about the use of plastic? Can we use more recycled plastic? Can we reduce foam in our products? Can we shrink the size? I will say one of the biggest things that even if you think generation over generation, just the smaller footprint of your technology can have tremendous advantages, not only from a energy efficiency, but also, for example, cooling. So by designing those principles, figure out, well, how would you actually score it? You build the whole education. We've educated over 7,000 engineers, for example, and then you really embed it into your product design process. And by doing that, starting to test your scoring, we were so excited that in our last purpose report, which was published this January, that 100% of all of our new products and packaging include these circular design principles. I think this is one of the ways that I can point to areas where we've saved money. I'll give you an example that sometimes I love where ideas come from, but just by stopping to paint some of our catalyst switches, where for those of you out there that aren't in the tech space, a lot of the technology is in some room or a closet where no one sees. And so just by not painting it, not only did you reduce kind of the volatile chemicals, but it was a $9 million savings. So it's little things like that you challenge your engineers or your supply chain to grapple with that I think ultimately not only increase their innovation and problem solving, but ultimately many times it has a positive impact on the business. So when you do that, you're really thinking through not only how you design your product and packaging, but the next step also is really thinking how you work with your customers and partners with explaining that there is, for example, remanufactured products. Sometimes our customers will give back product as they are introducing some of the newest generation, will remanufacture it with the same warranty, the same capability. We're seeing many customers, especially in Europe, requesting this kind of combination of new and remanufactured. So often at a great price point, great capability. So these interesting new circular models, as we think through, what does that look like? I can imagine creating kind of local circular economies. For those of you, I get so many notices here in New York City about kind of pop-up vintage markets. It's kind of that idea of how do you identify value along the whole life cycle and think through what the different business models look like.
I love those examples. I love the modular example in particular. What an interesting innovation, really, that you truly had to partner with engineering and design to sort of figure out, right? And so that's a really wonderful example of how do you work with the business and the business units to innovate and find these solutions.
And Emma, one of the things that I so clearly remember sitting down with a number of our common hardware engineers, one of the gentlemen, David Stallings, and they were showing me the latest switch. And what they were showing me is just by, for example, turning a fan in one different direction, what that did in terms of lowering kind of the cooling need. What you saw was pride, excitement. In fact, they won one of our biggest awards in engineering, the Pinnacle Award in 2024, because of how they thought through being able to incorporate the circularity designs. And what I think, some people think circular and they think, oh, it's a sustainability initiative, but I will tell you, it allows more innovative thinking. When you ask whether it's your engineer or your supply chain leader to solve for a host of issues and you bring in some additional environmental sustainability criteria, you really are accelerating to me more that disruptive innovation that I think differentiates a company.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's a great example. So let's talk a little bit about resiliency. And I'd love to have you tell our listeners, Mary, a little bit about the opportunities you see for the tech sector in particular to drive impact through innovation and resiliency. So you gave some great examples of Cisco and what you're doing inside, but how are you sort of looking outside of Cisco's walls?
This is probably one of the areas that I'm most inspired. Also, sometimes it really helps me recognize how many years I've been out of college when I see these young venture startups showing up with these talented individuals. But there's a couple different ways. We did make a commitment through the Cisco Foundation to really think through how we could leverage our patient capital, our technology, our knowledge in a way that we could really help think through that resiliency needed in communities, whether that is thinking through regenerative agriculture. And again, imagine the ability to think through whether an IoT device to understand the exact kind of nutrients a particular farm or farmer needs. I think one that really comes to my mind that I think, especially maybe tying it back to my experience after Hurricane Katrina, is a really interesting IoT device coming from a Hawaiian startup, Hohono. And this is an IoT device, but really easily installed that allows you in a community to really measure and see where floodwaters are starting to rise. When I think about so much that have happened just in the last 12 months here in the United States in terms of unanticipated weather events, it's a great example of using technology and thinking through really how does it scale? You've got to think through the business model. Could anyone, what is it required to install it, to maintain it, to really gather the information? I think a couple of that I'm fascinated by is how we're using kind of AI for good, so to speak. There are a number of really interesting organizations. One, for example, Vibrant Planet, that is using a whole host of different types of data access, LiDAR and others, to really map out the forest floor, to really think through how and where can you do that forest management to reduce the impact of potential wildfires. Another interesting influence that took place over the last year or two is as we were not only providing grants to nonprofits, we also were thinking through impact investing through the foundation. And what this really means is that you're using patient capital in these early startups, but you're looking for not only the return, the financial return as a typical venture capitalist would, but you're also looking for those impact measures that you might think about from an environmental sustainability perspective. And so by really thinking through impact investing, I think this allows us to really connect the dots between a network of both corporate foundation, family foundation, other corporate ventures to really start signaling the kind of technology solutions that we need. And as we talked inside Cisco, because we have our own development team here at Cisco, and talked about our own strategy, our own corp dev team decided to make some investments as well. So I'll give you two examples. One, a new form of energy, because in this day and age of AI, we need abundant energy. We need all forms of energy. So they invested in a wave technology. So imagine, a buoy, a really big buoy out there in the ocean, just going up and down. That perpetual wave motion is a really interesting form of energy. So we invested in an organization called Core Power Ocean. And then as I think about, now let's connect that to the network, think about the information that we would be receiving as well. Another interesting example is at the end of the best use of our product, that recycling phase. This is an area where I think we as a community can do more. I'm thinking through how we recycle technology. So we invested in a company called Decycle that is a more environmentally friendly capability. So there are a tremendous amount of opportunities out there. And I think one of the privileges is using my platform, the reach, the network of Cisco to identify these early stage startups where we can invest in, or these really innovative nonprofits that may be creating interesting nature-based solutions or nature-based jobs that I think are going to be fascinating. So when I think about resiliency from that, and this is about thinking through how technology can provide that information. How can we think through how we are first to respond after a weather event by bringing back the communications, for example, with our crisis response team? But I also think there's another way that I think about resiliency. And this, I also spend a lot of time thinking about how AI is going to change the way we work, the way we lead, and how are we anticipating the shifts and change in roles and jobs. This is one of the areas where Cisco also is part of a coalition of companies and organizations that really look at the most in-demand tech jobs and think through how AI is going to change that. And what does that look like? How do you shift those skills? Every day I think about, how I'm going to build my AI assistant to really help me because I know I shared with you a little bit, as someone who, is dyslexic, I am telling you, it is really, really hard for me to write, sometimes to read. This is why I just really hope everything is made into a mini series. But by creating an agent that can help me, that can take my voice and put it into words, is really going to be an area that I'm really excited to see how it can help accelerate my understanding, my learning, but at the same time, be able to help me share my knowledge and experience.
Oh, that's amazing, Mary. You just touched on so much. So I want to sort of recap a little bit. I heard you say that, Cisco's really investing in sort of innovative technology and startups outside of Cisco's sort of four walls and sort of, lending your expertise to the industry, to the world, which I think is so powerful. I used to work for a large company and we used to call our framework using our scale for good. And you truly just gave some wonderful examples of leveraging Cisco's scale for good. So I love that. The other thing is, resiliency. There's a business case for resiliency. You just mentioned sort of some of these extreme weather events that we're experiencing. What if instead of investing in the cleanup after these events, we invested in the resiliency? And you just mentioned that tech can really enable that and enable resiliency and sort of predicting before it happens, right? And helping these sort of communities prepare. I love that. I love those examples. So, well, you've already done such a wonderful job, Mary, sort of integrating AI into our conversation. It's very top of mind, I'm sure, for Cisco and definitely for the world. But let's sort of double click on AI a little bit because, again, you did touch on some of the opportunities with AI. At the same time, you also acknowledge that there is a risk in terms of AI having a footprint, right? AI does have a footprint. It requires a lot of energy. So talk about sort of this double-edged sword, right? It is an opportunity. It's also a risk. How is Cisco thinking about that?
This is where I feel like, AI and sustainability has to coexist if we want to see the opportunity that we believe AI is going to afford us. I think this is an area where it kind of goes back a little bit to that kind of how you design your products, right? Are you thinking through the future demands, designing in that energy efficiency? What does the carbon intensity of a new generation of a product look like? It's one of the first things also that we invested in when we created the Chief Sustainability Office was a sustainable data foundation, because we know that not only would I need it for maybe our voluntary reporting, but more and more of our customers are asking for those of you who aren't living and breathing scopes and everything, is the product carbon footprint or life cycle assessment, because it's now becoming one more criteria as they think through how they choose what products, what organizations to partner with. And I think that one, understanding how we can invest in and understand a range of energy sources. But I do think this kind of advanced intelligence, when I envision designing a product, let's say it's an AI data center, and you're thinking through, okay, what's the workflow? What are we trying to accomplish? Because I sometimes think people think AI, everything is agentic, where there's machine learning. There's a lot of different ways that we use that intelligence. One great way is just making sure that everything is secure. Can you identify an anomaly and kind of secure a particular part of your network as you think through what is the right action? But I do think that, to me, I look at how are we designing our compute? How are we designing it within a data center, for example? Where is that data center located? How are we thinking about cooling that data center? How are we thinking about operating it? Is there a digital twin, right? Are we able to create kind of a digital version that allows us to kind of map out all of the capability? Are we thinking through our software in the most efficient way as possible? Are we creating that observability that gives a data center or technology leader choices, whether to upload a particular piece of software or maybe to move workloads around their network. I do think this is one where, for me, I really think through scenario planning. So I think we know what our customers are using today. I can take a look at all of our products in the field. I can understand through different mechanisms what the emission factor is per a community, not just a country. I think you got to look at it at the community level. We can grapple with how modern and secure the grid is as another enabler or particular headwind. But at the end of the day, this is to me about how do you model out different scenarios and help identify more public-private partnerships to think through how do we move together. Sometimes in some of the conversations I've had, it's just even understanding what is the current need as we all electrify and as more things get digitized and we electrify, and then building out different scenarios and think through where and how we might co-invest along the lines of whether it's a new renewable energy or new form of energy, whether it's geothermal or different ways that we can planfully make this transition.
Oh, that's great. Yes, you just painted a picture. I mean, it is a very complex web, as I often describe it, right? There are so many different players in the AI sort of web. And one of the questions I always ask is, whose responsibility is it within the web to sort of, consider sustainability, consider decarbonization? And it sounds like Cisco is really sort of leading in that and taking responsibility and even informing and influencing others to take responsibility as well. Any thoughts from you on sort of how to untangle the web of responsibility within AI?
Emma, I know you know this well, but in some ways it's the beauty of the greenhouse gas, protocol, where by thinking through the value chain where we're all interconnected, you really can identify that we all touch each other. I often talk to different customers and I'm like, we've got people that live in your community or part of our supply chain. When you think about it, it does create the responsibility across the value chain. And I think this is creating some really interesting kinds of partnerships where you might not have before. In fact, later this week, I'm meeting with one of our top customers and partners to think through, as we look at our own goals, where can we not only share information, where might we co-invest? Where might we take a great idea that was piloted in one company and use it someplace else, whether in our company or in our ecosystem? When you think about web, that's why I think Cisco, a network, right? We're all connected. And I think what underpins this often is data. And the more we can actually invest in verifiable, transparent data, there's still quite a lot of assumptions we as sustainable leaders need to make when you don't have accurate data. And I think that sometimes can lead to sometimes overinvestment, sometimes underinvestment. So I do think it's an area that I spend a lot of time with my supply chain colleagues, my customers and partners, as we think through how can we co-invest to get better data, more refined data, so that we can make better decisions. I think one of the other things that I grapple with is, even if you think about that kind of resilient community, like every actor is part of it, whether it's public sector, private sector, academic, every vertical. And I think if you kind of pull all that together, there's a lot of similar strategies and approaches. And the faster we share what has worked, what hasn't worked. We also had the privilege of sharing in our latest purpose report that we did decrease our scope 1 and 2 by 90% in our last fiscal year. And Emma, that last year was hard. Often when you're starting this journey, you do the things that you think are bigger, maybe have the biggest impact. But when you get down to that last year and every carbon counts, it's hard. You really have to now not only come up with more innovative fuels and different ways that you're thinking about practices, but you're also now getting into change management behavior. And I think sharing how we did it or what worked or what we didn't anticipate with others is a great way to kind of connect that web with knowledge, with shared experiences. And I think one of the other things that I think is really critical here is the ability to keep reinforcing each of us in that network that we can make that next action happen, that we can keep momentum going, that we can build that business case. Because I do think we're at an interesting time where the integration of a business case, a financial business case with, let's say, an environmental action plan is coming together.
I love that. My gosh, so many good tidbits there. Definitely partnership, definitely co-investment and sharing and communicating. I love all of that. This is a time when we need to be, when AI is moving so quickly, we need to sort of stop and find time to sort of share out and support one another. Love that. Okay, Mary, we are at a fun part of the episode where I have some rapid fire questions for you. So I like for these to be short and quick, and we'll just roll right through. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Are you a coffee or tea drinker?
Coffee in the morning, a green tea in the afternoon.
Love that. Same here, by the way. Early bird or night owl?
My rescue dog has made me an early bird.
Love it. A book or a podcast that has shaped how you think about leadership?
It's one that I'm reading right now. It's kind of a little bit out of the kind of conversation, but Designing Your Life. This is one that I think the more authentic that you can really think through what is your purpose? How can you really connect the dots there? I think that makes you a better leader.
I love that. Yes, self-awareness is very important as a leader. Okay, what is your go-to way to reset when work feels heavy?
I kind of mentioned my rescue pup. So Luna, who is a rescue dog from Korea, the first thing, you go and you pet your, your cat, your dog, to me, play with a child. And then the second thing is get out there in nature. In New York City, it's either Riverside Park or Central Park. As soon as I get outside, especially now, it just completely changes your blood pressure, your temperature. You're more aware. You get grounded with the earth.
I love it. Nature and pet therapy. Great. This is sort of a hard one because I'm sure you've received a lot of advice, but what is maybe just one piece of advice that you felt was really, really good in your career?
I'd say it's be yourself. Emma, there's a period of time where I was kind of cosplaying, trying to look like what I thought an executive or, a business person looked like. And I think the more you can be yourself, the more then your capability, your expertise, your personality, your energy shows up.
Wonderful. Authenticity. Okay, what is one thing you're most excited about as it relates to AI and energy?
Yeah. I'd probably say all the new startups that I'm seeing with new forms of energy, the creative ideas that are coming out of university and into the startup market.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. That wave technology was a cool example. All right, one word you hope defines sustainability leadership in the next decade.
Results.
Great. All right, final one, Mary. Finish this sentence. I am most hopeful about
the enduring power of people and communities to innovate and care for each other.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Mary, for this wonderful conversation. I personally had a wonderful time learning more about you as a human and about Cisco's leadership in this space. Really, congratulations on a wonderful job. You've led so much great work, a lot to be proud of. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Emma. And I just will say there are so many wonderful people alongside me. It certainly is a crowdsourced strategy and impact here at Cisco.
Great. Team effort all the way. So tell us, with the final moments left, where can our listeners follow your personal work and where can they learn more about Cisco's sustainability progress?
Please join our purpose journey on our Purpose Hub, which really talks both our strategy and what we've done, an annual purpose report. And always you can find me on LinkedIn as I talk a little bit about, who I see out there. I do sometimes still talk about my rescue dog there as well, but Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thanks for tuning in to ESG Decoded. We hope this episode has inspired you to take action in your own ESG journey, stimulating ideas for partnership and innovation.
New episodes drop bi-weekly on Tuesday morning. Subscribe now on your favorite streaming platform to stay in the loop.
Join the conversation on social media using @ESG Decoded or visit ClimeCo.com for more resources.
Until next time, keep decoding, keep innovating, and keep making a positive impact.